Grow CFO is where finance leaders grow together. Join thousands of like-minded professionals using Grow CFO to access the combined knowledge and experience of the finance leader community. You can join us today, growcfo.net. Hello and welcome to the Grow CFO Show. I'm your host, Kevin Appleby, and I'm really excited today. Got a guest, Lucia Knight, who is famous for a TED Talk on how to design happier work. So we're going to talk about happier work today and what to do if you're feeling quite stuck in the role that you're in at the moment and generally not very satisfied with your life at work in the finance team. So, Lucia, welcome to the Grow CFO Show.
I'm so delighted to be here.
She says, trying to keep a straight face.
I'm just laughing at that intro. Famous. I never wanted to be famous. I still don't desperately want to be famous. That's something that my children want from life, but I just want to do great, happy work.
Okay, so happy work. What is happy work?
Maybe I can tell you a little story about what happy work is and what unhappy work was for me. Would that be helpful?
That would be very helpful.
So I spent 19 years in the world of financial recruitment and headhunting. So specializing in CFOs and finance directors. And I did this with joy for about 15, 16 years. I was transferred to Australia. I worked for startups. I worked for huge global businesses. And I loved my work until the day I didn't. And that day, I describe the day when I woke up not enjoying my work as awakening from a career coma. The last couple of years of the work that I did were the same as the previous years and the previous years. And I realized on that morning when I woke up that I hadn't learned anything new for at least 5 years or 6 years. And one of my superpowers, and we'll talk about that in a minute, is learning new things so quickly that I absorb them and forget learning them. But I hadn't learned anything in my working environment. And my amazing MD said to me, Lucia, I'll send you on any training course. If you want to learn anything, I'll send you on any training course. And I couldn't think of one thing I wanted to learn to make me better at the work I was doing. So I decided that day that in a year's time, I would not be doing the same work as I was doing on that day. But I had zero clue. I understood that I was stuck and I had no idea what else to do. And so I decided, I took a radical change that I do not recommend anyone. I went back to uni and I retrained as an occupational psychologist. And at the end of that 18 months of knee-walkingly exhausting work, I still had no clue on what I wanted to do when I grow up. I describe myself as stuck because I didn't know what to do. So I went on a 3-year research project where on day one, I didn't understand. I didn't know one person who had changed career after the age of 40 and was happier for having done so. And I'm quite ambitious and a little bit scientific of mind. And I decided I wanted to find and talk to 100 people who had done that. And after interviewing 6 or 7 of these people who were not in my friendship group, not in my business network, who were friends of friends overseas, I realized that there's some juice here. There are some secrets that some people know about changing career after a certain age, the midpoint in career, that I don't know. And I wanted to find them. So I interviewed 100 people and I discovered the secrets of happier work, not work that's going to turn you into a millionaire or billionaire, but work that is going to enliven you, give you deep satisfaction, work that you can design and deliberately design tomorrow to be better than today. And in those 100 interviews, I created maybe a formula for a lifetime of happier work.
Okay, back on some of that for a second.
Yeah.
So we're talking to finance folk here.
Yes.
Yes. And generally, you won't be millionaires, but you won't be badly paid.
Yeah.
So that need to go out and have money and earn a fortune as the key motivator possibly isn't there.
Yes.
But that motivator to do happier work, to enjoy what you're doing and get really satisfied by it is very definitely there.
Yes.
So let's unpick that. Yeah.
Here's how I see it. Most finance people are bright, well-educated individuals who often follow a fairly linear career strategy. The career path is often linear. Certainly at the beginning, it's entirely linear. So you graduate, however you graduate, you do your accounting qualifications, whichever you choose, and then you go into a trainee position, management reporting, financial reporting, business partnering, financial controller, head of, all the way up.
And you get on effectively train tracks.
You get on train tracks that have been formed
And I
without your
remember
consent.
talking to my daughter about this as she was going through and finishing university. And she had a real desire to start her own business. Oh, Dad, you put me through this education. I've gone off. I'm going to get a degree from St. Andrews.
Yeah.
I can't just not use that. And I surprised her by taking the opposite approach and saying, Kate, if you don't do it now, you will remain on some train tracks that you can never afford to get off, because you'll get to the next level. You'll earn a little bit more, take on the financial commitments that match that earning a little bit more. And you'll get to a stage that you think, oh, I want to go do that. But that involves walking away from this big salary.
Yes. And once you get used to that lifestyle, whatever that lifestyle is, it feels very risky to come off the train tracks. And it feels scary. It feels unknown. There are so many examples of people who tried it and failed. And we are predisposed to remember those negative experiences rather than seeking out people who've done it and thrived. And so on these tracks, as you see people all the time, there's not much flexibility. There's often not a lot of individuality. And there are strengths that are highly valued, and there are weaknesses that are not allowed to enter a career. So we all put this mask on, particularly in corporate. It's necessary to put the mask on. I am big, I am strong, I am clever, I can problem solve, I can deal with people issues, I can lead people, I can do all of these things. But as you get higher and higher up the ladder, you become more committed. You are earned more, you are earning more. But I see a very common pattern, and it comes at the mid stage and beyond of the ladder. So in our finance world, that might be financial controller, finance director, that sort of head of FP&A level. Yeah, I don't know if I'm categorizing that properly, but if there's a moment to pause and think, sometimes it's hard to answer the question, did I really choose this path? Do I want the next step? And you're looking up around at CFOs or finance directors, and there are less of them. Are they modeling behavior that you want to model? Are they actually doing work that's really exciting for you to do? Or do they look stressed? Do they look overburdened? Do they look exhausted? And so that's where I think there is a very natural moment to pause and think, my definition of success at this level, so mid-level broadly, might need to change if I don't want to continue on these very narrow train tracks. Do you see that? Is that in any way common in your world?
I think so. I think there are a lot of people that would say that.
Yeah.
And I think you would ask people to say, what percentage of your job do you enjoy?
Exactly.
And I think you'd get a remarkably small percentage.
Well, interestingly, I do that research. Every single time someone books in to call, I ask them to fill in a form, and I ask them just to give a gut instinct. Yeah. What percentage of the time do you enjoy your work? And the most common is 50% and below. So what that makes me say, 50% sounds okay, doesn't it? It sounds perfectly acceptable. But if we work 8 hours a day, and many of us work more, yeah, if we work 8 hours a day, that's 60% of our waking hours spent at work. And if we're only finding 50% of them satisfying or deeply satisfying, it's not enough.
Not enough at
I
all.
don't feel like it's enough. Do you?
No,
Yeah.
it is not enough.
Yeah.
The number you should be looking for should be up in, 100,
60,
ideal.
70. Oh, look, in an ideal world.
There's always going to be stuff that you've got to do that you really don't want to.
Always.
Always. But surely if you want to be nearer, I would have thought 75% than 50.
Look, anything between 50 to 75 is a realistic number if you take control of it. So given that my title is a career satisfaction designer, you'd expect me to be sitting at 100. I'm not, but my average, I look at it once a week and I write down a number. My average is around 65. But that's because I've chosen to be a solopreneur. So I have to do things that aren't my superpowers, drain me a bit, and are a bit annoying. But I outsource as many of those as I can so that I can increase that number positively. But there are days that I can design around my superpowers that do hit 90 or 100.
Yeah.
I feel like I can control
I'm
that.
getting into that state as well. Part of Grow CFO as a startup. At the beginning, it was all very exciting. Fantastic.
Yeah.
You're in a business that started from scratch. You've got no money to start with. You're doing stuff without being paid for it. So you don't pay other people to do it. The business starts taking off. You've got some money coming in, but it's still not really enough to pay anybody else. And you keep doing all the things that you shouldn't, that aren't in your superpowers, as you say. And now the business gets bigger and bigger. And some of those that you thought weren't going to be a problem because only took a little bit of your time, start taking a lot of your time. And I've got the problem right now as we speak that I've been handling the customer support desk in Grow CFO right from the start. And that wasn't too bad when you only got a couple of support tickets a month. But now that we've got a huge membership and we've got loads of programs going on, and it's the support desk's the primary way of somebody we don't know contacting the business.
Yeah.
You know, a couple of tickets a month could rise to easily a couple of tickets a day.
And even if they could be solved in 5 minutes, it's hours and hours of your time that isn't satisfying.
I'm on a major project at the moment to get myself unstuck from some of those things. But that's a completely different world to the one we're talking about, our audience of stuck in the role you're doing in corporate.
I think that it feels natural that we say the formula for a lifetime of satisfying work and for you to maybe pull it apart to see how it would work for your audience. But I see, and it's very simplistic and very top level, and of course there's complexity, but as a framework, if you are sitting in a corporate world at the moment and you are feeling this isn't right, but it's not really wrong, I don't know what to do next, do I move? Yeah, and you're in that sort of, you can ask yourself the question, how much of my time? But it doesn't give you an answer of what to do with it. So imagine a Venn diagram. There's 3 circles and they're interlinked. So the first one is, it's absolutely critical that you use your unique superpowers, and I'm happy to explain that in a minute, but your unique superpowers of which you need to have 3, 4, or 5 of them, as many hours of every day as possible. So that's 1. Number 2, you need to point those superpowers at a problem that is really interesting to you, but it's a problem for others that is really interesting to you. And then, of course, you need to make sure that you can earn as much as you need to earn to live the life that you want to live. But the superpowers piece, I think, is the piece that people can control and it can have an immediate impact.
I've got some ideas of what you might be talking about in superpowers, but I'll let you tell me more.
Okay.
What are these superpowers?
So everybody in your audience will understand strengths. There's been a real focus on that for the last 15 years in business. Use your strengths more at work. So the level above that is way more specific and unique. So if you're talking about strengths, you can get really good at things that suck your soul dry. You can get really good at things that bore you. You can get really good at things that take your energy away. But superpowers are unique activities that you love to do. You do lightly, easily, more quickly than almost everyone you know. And you could do these superpowers, these activities all day, and at the end of the day, have more energy than you did at the beginning. These fill you up. They're connected to your values. So I brought some examples of finance superpowers that I thought might be useful for your audience. Can I give you one of those examples? Yeah. And then maybe you can ask some questions. Okay. So one of my clients was the head of FP&A for a European division of a US business. And we worked together to find one of her superpowers, which was, and I'll read this one, translating words into numbers to tell the right story. So this person could persuade anyone to do anything using numbers, but telling the human story. And so she did this everywhere. She did this in every single meeting from she was junior all the way to head of European FP&A. And she loved doing it. When she talked about it, she was light and airy. The speed, the pace with which she spoke through the examples were amazing. And once she discovered one superpower, she went, oh, I love doing this. It's easy, it's light. And not everybody does this. I didn't realize. I thought all finance people did this, but they don't. So then she designed it into her work all the time. And she's now the UK MD of that business. So out of finance took 2 levels of promotional jump because that storytelling with numbers meant that she could make things happen quicker than anybody. Does that make sense? That's not just a strength.
Makes a lot of sense.
Other examples. So another client. This is a little bit longer, but I think it will make sense to you and your audience. So cutting through the noise to see the moving parts of a problem before asking the right question to reveal the best solution. Okay, so this was someone in banking who worked in a huge banking organization and did this everywhere she went. Once she nailed it down and realized that this was super unique, she started doing it more often. And her boss in this huge bank said, Renee, I want you to walk into any meeting you want to, because every meeting you walk into, you move things faster, more lightly than anybody I've ever seen. She then moved into fintech and is doing this every day of the week. And she doesn't have a job title anymore. She just does this superpower.
Right.
Yeah. And she gets paid very well.
We've got a couple of examples there. And I can see that there's a folk that have found something that they do better than other people. They really enjoy doing and are solving the problem that people want solving. That's the clue. It's that and bit on here.
Yes.
Okay, but let's wind back. How do you find these superpowers in the first? Because if we're sitting there and say most folk that are listening to this are finding less than 50% of their working day satisfying, there must be, we can say, which things do you find satisfying that form that 50%? So we can start getting to those. But it strikes me that there might be stuff that they're not even doing at all at the moment that could be the superpower. So how do you start uncovering these superpowers?
So I have only met one human who was a client of mine. So there will be others, but one human who didn't use any of their superpowers in their 9 to 5. Not one. I've just never seen it before. So I interrogated what on earth is going on. But the results of that should have been obvious. She was exhausted Monday to Friday, had no energy, couldn't socialize at the end of the day, crawled home and lit up on the weekend. If you are burned out, you cannot light up at the weekend. So she was exhausted during the week, but lit up. So when we figured that out, she was using, maybe not all, but often using her superpowers at the weekend. But everywhere I looked, on every single day of the week, on every project, and we looked for ours, there was no superpowers there. So how do you find them? So a simple starting point, if someone's sitting at home and feeling 50% or below of my life, my working life is spent doing work that's satisfying, you're absolutely right, Kevin. So I would suggest A4 piece of paper, split it into 4. In that 50%, let's get really granular. What were you doing? So long lists of answers. Yeah. So what were you doing in work over the last number of years that felt deeply satisfying? What were you doing that got you into flow? I don't love that term, but you could have done for longer. Yes. What would you do for free at work? And what tiny specific thing would you love the whole world to know about and do because it riles you up, and you would show them how to do it for free? If you had a list of things like that, and they should be small, really specific, tiny little things, you'll be able to look at the patterns to see, oh gosh, I love presenting. Okay, so it's not just presenting. Presenting might be a strength, but how do you get to the uniqueness of it? So then you have to go deeper, going, what was the best presentation I've done ever? What was the best I did last year? Did I present anything last week? Who was I presenting to? What was the subject? What was the format, environment? How interested were the people? What method did I use to present? Was I standing? Was it face-to-face? Or was it like the client I just said, it's just one-to-one, or it's just influencing small conversations in the corridor? Then we can figure out which of your values that is playing with. Does that make sense, going to that level of detail?
I look back at myself and think, well, what is it that I really like doing? I haven't recorded 600 plus podcasts for no reason at all. And at least 2/3 of those aren't this one, the Grow CFO show. They're the Next 100 Days podcast that I've recorded with a marketing colleague, Graham Arrowsmith.
Okay.
And Graham and I do that for no reason. And one day we said, let's start a podcast. Have we ever monetized it over 400 episodes? Well, maybe a tiny bit. No, we have not monetized a podcast. We've just done it.
Okay. So you have got nothing but data there.
Yeah.
400 podcasts that you've just done. Why? Why did you do 400?
Because we meet interesting people. Now, I was wondering when you said find your superpowers out, and you started talking about strengths, and something that I've done a long time ago and revealed a lot to me was Clifton Strengths Finder.
Yeah, it is a fabulous thing. Top 5 strengths that you can purchase for 25.
One of my 2 is the thing about learner is that you will learn about stuff for the sake of learning. And that's probably one of the things that sits at the back of podcasting for me, because you've got a new guest every time you record. You find something new out from that particular guest. You get into interesting conversations that pique your curiosity. And you start asking interesting questions and get interesting answers.
And what do those interesting answers do for you? Like, why bother?
That's a good question. But again, that comes back to sometimes the learner just fitting that natural curiosity. But,
okay, without telling me, can I just please ask you a couple more questions?
Yes.
Without telling me who it was, or you feel free to, but can you think back to the best, most enjoyable, most satisfying interview that stuck with you?
Oh, there's been a few, but there was one in particular. It was actually episode 66 of the Next 100 Days podcast. It was a long time ago. And we were interviewing this American chap called Dave D. Dave had this brand that basically says, sell more in 90 minutes than you do in 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And Dave's thing was all about this great big sales presentation and having a sales event and bringing people in. But it was really interesting because Dave D is actually a mentalist. And we'd been talking to Dave for about 40 minutes, and we were about to wrap the conversation up. And Dave went along the line to Graham and I and said, look, we're getting on really well here. I'll give you the real gold here. And he went deep. 40 minutes into the podcast, he went deep into the subject of psychological selling.
Yes. And why was that so enjoyable? You're like grinning like a Cheshire cat. That sounds like it was enjoyable.
I think that was because, well, A, it was the rapport that got him to open up. But B, it was, we thought that he just left us with some absolute gold.
Yeah. Okay. I totally get that. So your audience cannot see what I've just seen. So as you were talking about that, you went from thinking that learning, it's a strength, obviously, and it's a curiosity must be a value because it's high on your investment of time. Yeah. 400 episodes that you haven't totally monetized in a way that excites you yet, but you still keep going. But when you talked about that one episode with Dave, your eyes lit up. Your very calm demeanor started to speak a bit faster. You were grinning. It was marvelous watching it. So I'm going to suggest, and this is on the hop, that one of your superpowers might be learning through conversations where I can create rapport and find a golden nugget.
Would be.
I don't know. You can test it. Are there places you do?
Giving the audience here some great examples of what a superpower might be.
Yeah.
So I think actually look back through, and I can see why just looking back at the past couple of days or couple of weeks might not be the thing, that putting that piece of paper into 4 and thinking about it, but going back over time can really bring that superpower together.
And one of the things that would be great if you could also think about is, where do I do this outside of work?
Yes.
Because almost always, except for that one example I gave you, these superpowers, you can't stop doing them. You can't stop because they feel so good. So even if you were completely unaware of it, you will know that you keep doing this. So for instance, one of my superpowers is asking one more question than is socially acceptable. Now, this is acceptable in a world where I help people design their career because I have to get under their skin. Less acceptable with my husband, less acceptable in the supermarket, less acceptable, but I can't stop doing it. So that means I get under the skin of people who didn't necessarily want me under their skin. But I ask questions that my husband goes, oh my God, not again. But I love it. And the answers make me feel connected to humankind. Does that make sense?
That makes
It's a bit of a weird
sense.
one.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Yeah.
So can we talk about just the second bit of the Venn diagram? So pointing your superpowers at a problem for others that really excites you. Now, you might not use the word excite, that really interests you, that really resonates. So I see simplistically lots of people, I have seen this with my clients from finance, the world of finance, going, the problem that really interests me is homelessness or deforestation, a charitable, not-for-profit problem. And they think, well, I could do my finance stuff in that world, and then I would feel more satisfied. And sometimes that works, but it needs way more thinking through than that simple
I
movement.
challenge that. You're doing the same things, different environment. So you be doing the same things that sit in the 50% of your job that do not light you up. Just because you're doing that for a charity and you really agree with the charitable purpose.
Yes.
Isn't suddenly going to change things dramatically in those tasks that you do not like.
And that simplistic thinking means that if you were to do that without understanding your superpowers, you're just taking the same problem to a different environment. Same, if you just move to another company that does something different, it's going to be interesting for a while. But unless you're taking your superpowers and pointing them at that problem, you're going to have the same 50% issue. Might be a different 50%, but it's the same 50% issue. I'm with you. So that's really important.
About values, and I've certainly ended up in an organization where the values have been different to the ones of the organization before. I haven't realized that I'm going there. And actually that non-alignment of values can make things worse instead of better.
Absolutely. But it's really hard from the outside to understand the lived values of that company. But it's also your boss's lived values can influence you an awful lot. So matching those is also super important. So another phrase, the opposite to superpowers is kryptonite. So you can try to use your superpowers in a kryptonite environment and they're not as powerful and you could get drained. So understanding that match in environment to your values, to which they have to want your superpowers. They have to value your superpowers. So if your superpowers lie around commercial, finance, business partnering, etc., and they don't want it, you couldn't use those superpowers very often, which means you've got a very small chance of feeling deeply satisfied.
Okay. So we're looking in the second part of the Venn diagram. Is there anything else we need to know in this bit?
In this bit, I think we covered it. So the environment has to fit with your values. The problems have to be super exciting for you. So this is unusual, and I think this will fit with your analytical audience. So my process for helping people find a different direction, the best different direction for them at that moment, is to get them to, I called it the direction finder process, to get them to write down every single small specific problem in the world that resonates with them. And that can be hundreds.
Yes.
And then we take every one of those problems and we look at the theme. So we categorize them, subcategorize them. Then we look at which one of those problems are you actually really interested in contributing to a solution, however that is, and which of those do you really want someone else to solve? And then we go through other pieces of analysis process that means that we can test a gut instinct against some analysis. And that allows people to then forecast, do a business plan for 5 years. And I don't mean a business plan as we know it, but to forecast for 5 years. If I choose to solve this problem, what does year 1 look like? A guesstimate. What does year 2 look like? How could it feel? What do I need to learn? How much could I earn? And we can do that for a few ideas. Rather than what I see most people do is either just react to a job profile or an advertisement or a conversation within their network said, hey, we've got this really interesting thing. Do you want to come? And instead, it's much more strategic, well thought through.
And there's that shiny object syndrome there that you've got to avoid. And there's final module in our future CFO program, your first 100 days in your new CFO role. I do tend to say to people before we get there, look, stand back for a moment. Before you even accept this job, are you accepting this because some headhunter somewhere found you, started talking to you about this CFO role, and CFO role, that's what I want to do. Somebody's talking to me about one now. I've got to go get this job. Have you properly asked yourself what sort of CFO you want to be? What sort of company you want to work for? What are your values? Are those values in that company before you've accepted the job? Because you can get headhunter there. You can be extremely qualified to take the role. You can sail through a set of interviews and land a job in a company that is completely wrong for you. And I've seen people that have taken a CFO role and last 6 months in it and move on.
Often. I think it happens more often than you imagine, if I remember my days as a headhunter. Because no matter what you do, if you spend 8 hours in various interviews with various people, you can reduce the risk of it being wrong, but it's really hard to see the lived experience when you're not there.
But you're in there, in those interviews, asking questions to people. They will have a way of trying to really sell the job to you.
Yeah, because they've got a problem and you look like the solution.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's about that deliberately choosing what I want and trying to match it, what I want and need to feel satisfied, and matching it to the problems they have and how they want their problems solved. If that's a match made in heaven, there'll still be some issues. I know you'll issues in the first 100 days, but the strategic thinking is done. The framework for analysis is done, and you've minimized the risk of it being wrong.
So we've talked about a few things here. We've talked about thinking about those situations that really light you up, where your whole persona changes, and isolating the superpower. We've talked about looking for problems that you might fancy solving, look through those and looked at the possibilities of some of those. And then we've looked at, is there a business case around pursuing this, looking forward and saying, what does year 1, year 2, year 3 look like? So I think we've got the basis of a really good process there, Lucia.
Why, thank you very much. It's only taken me 7 years to get there.
I am loath to stop this conversation, but I'm aware that you and we've been chatting getting on for 45 minutes on a podcast that's supposed to run for 30. But okay, I've been fascinated by this. No doubt other people in our audience have been. So if they wanted to go just that little bit further, where could they find out more about what we're talking about?
So if you go to midlifeunstuck.com, I have been writing about the problems and the opportunities of designing work that makes you feel great for 7 years. So there are so many articles you can look at that can guide you. There's downloadable resources. There's all sorts of little bits that could just take you one step forward, or maybe shift the way you're thinking about your career strategy. And that's my mission.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much. This has been a fascinating conversation, and we maybe find one of your superpowers.
Maybe. Lucia, thank you very much for being this week's guest on the Grow CFO Show.
It is my absolute pleasure and delight.